Hello, friends, and welcome to Binge O'Clock, the podcast where we watch something and then we talk about it. I'm Joy Selden, and I've seen almost everything.
I'm Danielle and I've seen almost nothing.
I'm Nella, and if you ever want me to not find something in your room, you'd best go take care of it before I come to clean.
Surprise, listeners, we have Nella.
I'm here for the movie night because I couldn't stay away. You all were going on about, let's do Howl's Moving Castle for our 50th. And I was like, I want to come for Howl's Moving Castle. I love that. I love that movie and that book. What if Nella?
That's true, friends. It is Galentines Day. It is Howl's Moving Castle, a movie that all three of us love. Mm-hmm. And it is our 50th episode. We made it to 50. Woo!
Woo! You made it to 50.
I'm just jazzed to be here.
Through all the twists and turns and tangents, you've stuck with us.
I feel like the movie nights that Nella drops in for is what makes Fringe worthwhile for her.
Oh, no.
She's like, well, I can deal with the Fringe nonsense as long as I get to talk on that Batman, the Batman 1967 and Howl's Moving Castle. Thank you very much.
Agreed. You gotta give me a little bit of carrot with that stick. So.
But yes, today we are going to be talking about Howl's Moving Castle, the Miyazaki film from 2004. There are currently two versions of it. I feel like there'll be a 50th or a 20th or 30th or something anniversary where they redo something. It seems to be the pattern. We watched the dub version. I really wanted to watch the sub version also because I love the sub version. But unfortunately, I didn't have that available in time.
I mean, I love them both for very different reasons. And I'm usually the person who's like, subs only, but in this very specific situation, I like them both almost as different movies. Yes. And it was kind of funny because I watched this movie in two parts because I'm a busy person. And for the first half of the movie, I had the brain power to take notes on it and read the subtitles. And then this evening, when I went to finish the movie, I just decided I couldn't do that. So I watched the second part of the movie, dubbed.
We do what we must.
I mean, that is a lot of notes to take if you're also reading subtitles. Mm-hmm. But yeah, for those of you who haven't seen Howl's Moving Castle, obviously spoilers in this podcast, we highly recommend this one. It's a beautiful film. It's a beautiful story. Nella's going to talk a little bit about the book because she was actually able to read the book Howl's Moving Castle that it's based on.
My sincere thank you to the Emma Clark Library, and they're actually having an ebook version I could download. Support your family's local public libraries, because somehow the New York Public Library and the Queens Public Library, of which I both have subscriptions to, did not have ebook versions available in time. So I had to go use my father's account for his local library.
We stand the Emma Clark Library.
Thank you, Emma Clark Library.
We stand. It's a beautiful library too, by the way. If any of you are ever near, is it in East Setauket?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful library with a beautiful reading room. I loved visiting it the last time we were out there.
It's like, that's right. Come to my parents' house for Christmas, and then we take you to the local library. I know how to show you a good time.
I love taking my mom, the retired librarian, to a library. It's like, does it make you nostalgic, Mother? Do you enjoy it? Is it good? But it is a really beautiful library. And I'm so glad they had it because Nella was reading the book and there were many, many differences, which we'll get into in a second. But the movie, to sort of sum it up real quick, is a love story that takes place in sort of a fairy tale setting with witches and wizards. And it's not your conventional love story. It really does feel like a fairy tale. And Nella, even as you were reading the book, you were like, I forgot how much of a literal fairy tale this is. Like, doesn't it open with like, all you really have to know is there are witches and wizards and...
I mean, it really opens with the examination of Sophie, and, well, she knew that as the eldest, like, she would never amount to anything because the youngest is the one who always gets the magical adventure. And so, like, and it instantly just sets the scene of this is a magical fairyland where all those tropes from European fairy stories are true. Like, it's always the youngest child who finds their fame and fortune. They do skirt it a little bit because Sophie has a stepmother, and the book goes out of the way to say, no, she's not an evil stepmother, though. She did try very hard to be loving and kind. But then it's implied that, like, the stepmother does take advantage of Sophie because she's so dutiful. And so the mother is like, well, you must work in the hat shop forever and ever. And like, I'm going out and I'm getting business, I'm the face of the company. And meanwhile, she's just spending all the money that Sophie's making, as Sophie slaves away in the back room and like doesn't go out for 3 months. And I tell you, it was big pandemic feels, but.
But yes, and the movie opens much in the same way. I do find it interesting that you get that kind of backstory about like, well, that makes a lot of sense because the movie doesn't open with Sophie. It opens with Howl's moving castle, which is an amazing sight, like with feet and a mouth and wings, fish wings.
I think that the way the book opens is like classic Western fairy tale opening, right? But the Miyazaki version of This Is a Magical World is a walking castle that comes out of the fog in the middle of a beautiful field.
Yes.
And there are sheep, like little
and
sheep.
there are sheep.
Walking next to the castle. Like that's the Miyazaki version of it.
And the sheepherder waves at Howl's moving castle like it was going to wave back, which I thought was really precious.
And I also really enjoy that dichotomy because in the book, immediately Howl is painted as this like dangerous figure who eats the hearts of young girls, and like no one, like you can't even, you're warned as a young girl from even like going out alone on the streets in broad daylight because what if Howl gets you, and, as he's wandering around the waste in his in this castle, which by the way, the author later would be quoted as saying, like, they asked her like, well, how do you feel about Howl's moving castle, the movie? And she's like, oh, it was great. I never imagined the castle with feet. I thought it more like a hoverboard, but I've got a couple of models around the house. I love it.
I love it. That. I love that, like, it's essentially Miyazaki's fan art of Howl's moving castle.
That's precisely what this is.
Yes.
Right?
Well, because, like, of course you're going to give it feet. That's, like, just straight up Baba Yaga stuff, And it's there's such chicken feet, too. Like...
Oh, they so are.
I love it.
It's such a weird thing. Like it's such a contraption, that house. And the other great thing about it, which apparently is also in the book, was like once you're inside Howl's moving castle, is like there's basically the hearth where the fire is and maybe 2 bedrooms and a bathroom.
Yeah. Howl doesn't actually make it big enough for like anyone. It's just like he has his bedroom, a bedroom for, well, in the book his name is Michael, but that's Markle in the movie, and the bathroom. And that's it.
That's all you need.
That's all you need. It's like that's, that bachelor pad, that singles bachelor pad of just like, yeah, and then we have this spare room, and then but most of the fun happens by the kitchen hearth, and that's, that's it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. But when we do meet Sophie, she's sitting at her workbench, working on her hats. And these hats are like beautiful and flamboyant and like simple while also being complicated, like the way she's able to put them together. I would argue probably that her stepmother's hat is the pinnacle of what is that when she comes in like halfway through the film.
I love the first one we see her in, though, because the other piece of this is that it's wartime, right?
Yes.
There are battleships and airships and people cheering.
Parades and cheering the soldiers. And
exactly. And so her mom's first hat that we see her in literally has cannons coming out the top of it.
Yeah.
Like a full-on bird. A full-on bird with cannons under its wings.
And this is just pure Miyazaki, which I also love. You know, like, this is always an ongoing theme in a lot of Miyazaki's movies about the waste of war and how people get wrapped up in war and how you should be afraid of it. You shouldn't be something. But then in this movie, really playing up the propaganda of war and how excited people are until it starts to actually see the effects of it with the bombing of the harbor. And then they start realizing, wait, this is serious. Whereas in the book, that, you know, there is technically war in theory, and Howl is helping the king with, like, being able to transport things lightly and easily. But that's not the story. The king is actually trying to stop the Witch of the Waste because she threatened his daughter. You know, there's no war really in the book. And so I do really enjoy this twist of where Miyazaki makes it more about, you know, Howl has all this amazing power, but really, yeah, like, the Witch of the Waste wants his heart, but there's this greater issue going on that he has no power over, actually, you know, until they solve the problem and they get another ally on their side, and then maybe we can finally stop this war, which I really enjoy.
Which also happens in the last 2 minutes of the movie.
Yes, it super does.
It is an hour and 57 minutes of turmoil. And then in 2 minutes, it's all wrapped up.
Yeah, it is. It escalates not even that quickly, right? Like,
No.
It feels like a normal pace. They really get to flesh out the interactions of everybody. Like, you really get to feel why the characters are doing these things. You understand exactly what each person is doing. And then the very end, it's like, I guess we're all okay. Here it is.
Wrap it all up. You
Let's just
weren't
wrap
here
it
for
all
the
up.
conclusion. You were here for the characters.
Which I think is, like, why Howl's Moving Castle is one of those slightly unsung heroes of the Miyazaki, films. It's just this, I feel like it's somewhat of an acquired taste, but it's also just like, it's just such a beautiful love story. But
Well, that's the thing. I think that's why it's unsung, because at the end of the day, that's what this movie is. It's a love story. The end.
yeah. It's a love story. You're welcome. Isn't
And
this
it's
what you wanted?
beautiful. Oh, Danielle's catnip. A love story.
And with all that food, Danielle, you've got everything you could want. And Calcifer, which is basically a cat. It's just a fire cat.
He's just a fire
Love
cat. He's
Calcifer.
It's just a
good
fire cat.
Okay, so the first conflict in the story comes up because, and this is played differently in the book, which is part, you know, for some reason, I think I remember the first part of the book much more distinctly than the last part. Listeners, I read this book more than a decade ago, maybe when I was in middle school. So I have very fleeting memories of it. But the main conflict begins when the Witch of the Waste puts a curse on Sophie, hoping that Sophie will then pass that curse on to Howl. I think in the books, that curse was placed, Nella, you correct me, was placed on Sophie because the witch was jealous of the hats and the magic that was in the hats.
Yes, because what we find out is that Sophie does have magic. She talks life into objects. So as she's sitting there making these hats, you know, it's described as there was this gray hat. And she was like, oh, well, you know, you're not much. You'll have to marry for money. And then the person who buys the hat ends up marrying money. And then there's this green hat where it's just like, oh, yes, like everyone's going to want to run off with you. And that woman who buys the hat runs off with a count. And so that's why the hat shop becomes so popular, because women want the hat that got the count. And Sophie doesn't realize it yet, but that's magic. And the Witch of the Waste
that's my favorite.
Transforms her because she doesn't want another witch around, you know, on her turf. And that's why she transforms.
Especially one as powerful as Sophie, because Sophie doesn't even realize she's doing it. I think that's why I remember that part of the book. There's something so beautiful and visceral about it.
Yes.
Just like speaking your intentions into a hat. And she didn't know that that's what she was doing. It It was because she's this quiet character who doesn't ever get to leave the hat shop. And so when she's making the hats, she's imagining all of the possibilities of this big outside world. And all of those imagined possibilities are just siphoned into the hat.
Yeah.
Which my very quiet child self connected with. Surprise.
Yes.
Well, I mean, don't we all love a protagonist that like doesn't know their own worth exactly, or doesn't know their own power, and like
It's such appealing for like a young person to see that and recognize that. And I know that gets mocked a lot after Twilight about like, you know, she wasn't anything but a mousy, beautiful brunette who could do nothing wrong, you know? And, but, you know, when it's done well, it really is affecting. And especially with Sophie, who is so sensible and so stubborn. But that's her fatal flaw. She's too stubborn. Like, she is convinced she will amount to nothing. She is convinced that she is not worthy of any time or attention. And so when the curse is placed on her, and I love this in the book, Hal right away knows that this is someone who has been cursed. And he's trying to figure out where he knows her from because he kind of recognizes her, but not quite. And in the book, it was actually him who on May Day was like, hey, can I buy you a drink? Oh, you're such a little gray mouse. Like, can I walk you to, you know, and of course he's being flirty and like a bit much. And she remembers him, but he can't quite place her because she's an old woman.
rather than two soldiers flirting with her and Hal kind of grandiosely sweeping her away.
Precisely.
I mean,
it's Hal. It's Hal
scene.
instead.
I mean, and I do think this is where Miyazaki like really sold it, because like that thing with the soldiers gets creepy really fast.
Yes.
You know, maybe it has the whispers of when it was Howl, but it was funny because we were watching it with Nella and she said, oh yeah, see those lines were Howl. And then it continues into she doesn't necessarily have to, you know, it gets really skeezy. And Nella was like, he did not say that.
Hal didn't go that far.
Hal didn't go that far. He didn't go that far.
I love that scene. I love the music. I love the visual of them walking on the air.
Yes.
I love the way I love the way that he helps her get there, and then she's able to walk through the air with him. It's all beautiful.
Just so gallant and but it's such a showman way of doing it. Like, he's so vain. I love how
it's so
vain
annoying.
He is.
Yes, it's so annoying. It's so annoying.
And he's so familiar with her.
You can't not love it.
Right?
He's so familiar with her. Like, they've known each other for ages.
Jaunty jacket where his arms are never in the sleeves, but somehow it's always staying on. You're like, ugh.
Yeah, I actually also had a moment with that jacket where I was like, I don't understand you. I don't know why, but something about you really bugs me. I don't know what it is, but you know, here we are. That's
because
just
he's
life,
somebody
I
who
guess.
fundamentally every day spends 2 hours in the bathroom fussing over his appearance, and it's like,
well, this is so this is, and I don't know, maybe this is too personal, but like I've never liked the characters who are so full of themselves that they're like smarmy and overly charming, and they already know that you're in love with them or something. And I'm instantly like, I don't know what it is, but it's just like, don't tell me who to love. Like, you know, like I felt this way with like Captain Jack Harkness, where everybody was like, he's great. And I was like, is he though? Yeah. I don't know.
That's fair, but I do not know why, and I can't quite put my finger on it. Tell me if you can. I don't really get that feeling off of Howl in this movie.
definitely not in the movie.
Not in the movie.
It's like he's charming, but he's just accidentally crashing into things, and I don't know. There's something about him that doesn't feel smarmy.
I think there's too much brat there, because he reads to me like a brat, and that's something very different.
The other
like
thing
the
is
goo scene.
The other thing is that what the movie also removes is, again, the Howl eats the hearts of young women. And Sophie very quickly, when she enters the house, being like, oh, because they fall in love with him and then he ghosts them. He eats
Yes.
their heart. Oh God, it's a metaphor.
I love that she clocks that.
I know.
Immediately.
So much better than in the movie where it's like he'll never eat my heart because I've never been attractive, or he won't eat my heart because I'm a kindly old lady.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like
But then that comes into like one of the main threads of the book is that, you know, she's talking to Calcifer and Michael confirm that, well, and she's like, well, how will you ever know if he ever actually falls in love with one of these women? And they're like, oh, that'll be the day he runs out of here without like fixing his hair, putting on his best clothes. He'll look like a total mess. Like that's how we'll know he actually fell in love with somebody, because he won't care. And then, of course, that happens at the end of the book. Of course, Sophie still thinks he fell in love with what we find out is the fire demon that ate the heart of the Witch of the Waste, but she's like masquerading as a very beautiful Welsh woman. And then, of course, Sophie sees him as a total mess, and she's like, oh no, he fell in love with a school teacher. And meanwhile, he's just like, Sophie, thank God you're safe. Totally
I came here for you.
He came here for you, Sophie. He came here for you.
I also keep remembering, and okay, why don't we, you know, I know it's been a little over 20 minutes. I don't think we can really do a play-by-play. Why don't we kind of, we're going to kind of jump around a little bit. I know we were holding on to like the time travel twistiness of it all, but in the movie, you know, Sophie essentially travels back in time to see what happened to Howl and to Calcifer, like to understand how that worked, which basically he swallowed a falling star. Good job. But like there's
okay. The Boy Who Swallows Stars is actually my favorite song in this entire movie. Like I will play that song just on loop over and over, listening to that gorgeous, is it a clarinet? I'm not a music person. I'm sorry, listeners, but it kind of sounds like one. And just I
think it is.
But the thing is, like,
say.
He swallowed a star because in the movie anyway, he swallowed a star because he was a boy who was alone in a cottage, and he exits to the meteor shower, and he realizes that when the meteors hit the ground, they die. And so he caught one because he's Howl. He caught one like an idiot and gave it his heart so that it would survive. Right. And he's just so thoughtless.
I know.
Because that is such an idiotic thing to do. Like, do you wonder, you know what I mean? It's a star. That's your heart. But he wasn't thinking. He just did it. And
he wasn't thinking might as well be the subtext for this movie.
And that becomes a really big part of the problem because he has all of this power. He's under the control of these two warring kings. Both of the kings want him to join in the war effort. He doesn't actually have the good or the soul or the heart or whatever in him to keep himself from becoming this monster.
It did. It all started there in the field. And I also think part of that comes with the, you know, like him being a coward and running away because he doesn't really have this sense of, what did they call it in the book, Nella? He's a slither out?
No, he's a slither outer. He slithers out of things.
Which I think is such a great, like, oh man, I wish we kind of could have had that in the movie because it's like it's such a weird thing to say. And I'm just like, oh, but it's so perfect though. It's exactly what he does. But to get back to sort of my original point is I prefer the headcanon that like part of the reason he doesn't take these relationships seriously with all these other women and he basically ghosts them is because he's waiting to meet Sophie again. Mm-hmm. And once he sees Sophie again, he's like, there you are, which is like his first line.
Where have you been? Is his first line.
Where have you been? Like you could either read that as somebody like, I'm saving you from these two soldiers, so I'm just going to make believe we know each other. But like, the thing that makes that different for me is when he sort of deposits her at the sweet shop to see Letty, he gives this really like, that's my girl before he leaves. Mm-hmm. And it's such a familiar interaction.
Yes. It's like he already knows her because he does.
Because he does.
He saw her when he was a child. And wait, one more part of that, and what I love is that what that means is that the agency in this movie comes from Sophie. Like this was all Sophie's decision. It was Sophie who walked through the door when it was turned to black. It was Sophie who followed the ring to find Howl. And it was Sophie who told Howl, find me in the future. And so he does. She's the main female main character with agency. 1. 2, love story. 3, a love story that involves time travel. Dear listeners, you have found Danielle's secret favorite kind of movie, which is why I love both this and Your Name. They have all 3 of those things in common.
And number 4, they have really good looking food.
Number 4, really good looking food.
They both have really good looking food.
Oh, why doesn't my eggs and bacon ever look like that? It can't just be me. My eggs and bacon will never look as good as the eggs and bacon in this movie.
I mean, I think you really do need to invest in very, very thick cut bacon, but even then, it's like it's never as good looking.
It's never magically delicious.
Slides around and fits together and then pulls apart in exactly the right way. Also,
watching the feral child eat was one of my favorite things in this movie. He's so feral. Nella was just like feral child every time he ate something. I was like, yep, there he is, big mood.
Feral child being raised by an absolutely absent-minded, vain man who's a coward. Yes, this makes perfect sense,
who's barely there. Who's barely there and who also barely has his own appetite. You know, which again, like there are so many little pieces of like, you know, this is why he doesn't have his heart. You know, like these are the little, you know, sort of clues you can see, which I really enjoy. Of like, you know, he doesn't really have appetites. He doesn't really, you know, have passions. He mostly just runs away all the time. He has depression.
He doesn't even properly run his shop. Markle runs his shop.
Exactly.
He doesn't clean the house. The house is a mess until Sophie arrives.
Yeah, maybe we should talk about that because as soon as Sophie, you know, has that frustrated moment where she's just like, and now I'm going to clean all the things because that's what I'm going to do because I can't talk about this curse. I turned to Nella and I was like, it's big. It's big you energy.
I, too, clean manically when life is awful and I have no control over anything.
Big mood.
It's big mood. Big mood. I am, you know that scene from Emperor's New Groove where the wife gets really, really mad and she goes, I'm just gotta clean something. And she starts washing dishes. That's me.
Yes.
That's me.
I think that when I get angry, it's a little bit more like Calcifer muttering to himself, may all your bacon burn.
I can see that.
Oh, Calcifer. I love Calcifer in this movie. He's so cute.
He's just precious.
I mean, he's one of the best main characters in the whole thing. And this is also where, like, the sub and the dub is, like, an interesting conversation because I do love both equally, but for very different reasons. Like, I love Billy Crystal doing Calcifer. Like, it's such a good choice. I actually really enjoy Christian Bale as Howl. It felt right.
Yeah, agreed.
You know, even having the old and young Sophie. And I think, oh no, who voices the Witch of the Waste? Like Lauren Bacall voices the Witch of the
like
Waste.
That, yeah. I think it was Lauren Bacall.
Which is kind of amazing. But yeah, like the voice acting in this is great. There is one scene, and I've already told the ladies this, but I'll share it with you listeners. There's one scene that I prefer in the Japanese with English subtitles. And that's when, you know, Sophie, under the guise of, as this old woman, under the guise of Howl's mother, has gone to the palace to sort of plead the case that, like, you know, you don't really want Howl fighting in your war. He's such a lazy son, you know. And towards the end, she's actually talking with Howl's old master who like helped to teach him magic. Also, we'll get to Saruman in a second, but man, that should have been the big bad for the entire... It's like, was that the evil the whole time? Feels like that was the evil. I know it was war,
think so.
but...
Yeah, but Solomon is one of the people who started the war, or is keeping the war going, right? Because at the end of the movie, she's the one who's like, well, I guess we'll call it off. She could have done this the whole time.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, make your original point.
She was trying to trap Howl, and so, but like...
Exactly. It was just all a trap.
Okay, wait, but the part of the dub
So the part of the dub I really love is Howl shows up impersonating the king, and he's like really subdued and basically like, we're not going to use magic to win this war anymore. I've decided to change my mind. And then the real king shows up, and he's blustery, and like large presence just fills the room, and he bursts through the door and he's like, Saruman! And I love everything he says, and I only love it that deeply in the Japanese because it's such a time and a place in anime that I'm just like, yes, this is what I want.
This is the energy that scene was asking for.
Yes. You just like imagine like somebody with just big energetic nonsense.
It's like what it needs is a Teddy Roosevelt, but if you can't get that,
exactly, you needed a Teddy Roosevelt for this scene.
Even though in real life Teddy Roosevelt was a very soft-spoken man, so
which I can't imagine. Like I understand that to be fact, but my brain doesn't want to admit it. Like,
there, it's all right.
I can't look at pictures and be like, how on earth was this a soft-spoken man? Mm-hmm. Just hear Saruman on repeat in my head.
She is the big bad, right?
She's got to be.
It's not the Witch of the Waste.
She's the one who's being extremely malicious, right? Like she's allowing witches and wizards to turn themselves into monsters for this war. She's stripping witches and wizards of their power unless they acquiesce to whatever her demand is. I don't even know what she would have demanded of the Witch of the Waste. I think that was just a weird flex.
Right? Unless the Witch of the Waste just refused to help already, you know?
Maybe.
Yeah, some of that part is a little unclear to me.
I mean, maybe just to scare Howl. You know, I mean, like, maybe it was all about Howl. And, like, she definitely has copies of Howl serving her. Like,
which is
no doubt in my mind is that, like, so I've created another 13-year-old Howl because that's how old he was when he was, you know.
Her apprentice.
My apprentice, yeah. And it's just, made me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Which, and I believe in the book, Nella, the Witch of the Waste is, like, firmly the big bad that they're fighting against,
you know,
right?
The funny thing is, she is. Like, in the book, she, again, like, she's trying to get to Howl because what she's actually trying to do is build the perfect man, which requires putting together the parts of 3 men, and Howl is going to be the head. So she captures and kills the wizard Solomon, and uses his body parts, and then, like, throws the rest into, I think Suleiman is the one who becomes the turnip head scarecrow. And then she captures and kills the Prince Justin, who she then uses parts of him, and then the rest she sort of mashes with some leftover bits from Suleiman and makes a servant she names Percival. And then Howl is going to be the head on top of this Frankenstein body. And of course, because of magic, at the end, you know, the 2 other men are restored to their actual forms. But I can't. But so the Witch of the Waste actually ends up dead pretty quickly. Once we get into, like, the actual curse and, like, all these, like, moving bits finally coming together, because it turns out the one who really wants Howl wasn't the witch. It was the fire demon that ate her heart, because she herself had given her heart to a fire demon, giving it an extraordinary life. It gave her extraordinarily long life too. And that would be the fate of Howl if he cannot separate himself from Calcifer. She is the warning to Howl of, you will become this if you can't figure out how to break this spell.
See, that's an interesting thing, I think. Because, like, once you strip the Witch of the Waste of her power in the movie, she definitely just becomes like sort of this wise old woman who is
She's
kind
a silly
of
old woman. She's not wise.
She's sometimes there and she's sometimes not. Like there's definitely a moment like she has her like look, she's wise when it comes to love, I think. Cuz like she's the one who has to tell Sophie she's in love, and I always love those characters. Just like you don't even know what you're doing.
Right. Don't lie, you've been sighing all day.
Yeah. And sometimes she's like in there and sometimes she isn't. Like how many times does she say, what a pretty fire? Well,
that's the thing. Like, she's so interesting, I think, because that she is she seems very harmless and silly and obsessed with love. But what that really is she's looking for Hal's heart. So it's like deep down inside, she was actually just being really sneaky, right?
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know how much of that was sneaky and how much of that was like, I don't know.
Well, right, because it's the kind of, it's not love. It's like and it's not quite so much lust. It's just wanting to completely control and own someone, because you think they're pretty, because like you want to keep them around. To me, it's like such that kind of obsession. That's kind of thoughtless and cruel. But then also why she can like look at Sophie and be like, yeah, you got it pretty bad. Should have been my heart, but I guess you got it first.
Right, exactly. It can never really belong to the witch because Hal's in love with Sophie too. Mm-hmm. But I do think that the way the witch kind of holds the heart in her hands adds credence to what you're saying, Nella, because she wasn't going to take it and insert it in herself. I don't think that was ever her goal. I think she was going to take it to keep it. Yeah,
she wanted to keep it. She wanted that part of Howl that really no one else had really, because it's been within a fire demon since he was 13. He's never actually loved anyone before. He hasn't had the heart for it.
Yeah.
Like Calcifer said, it is literally still a child's heart.
Yeah.
I love her holding on to it, though. And I also love the way Sophie takes it from her, which is she just hugs her and begs her to give it to her.
Yeah.
And eventually the Witch of the Waste is like, oh, you really want it, don't you? All right, here.
Take care of it. Now, I think that moment I really like, and it ramps up a ton in the last 6 minutes of the movie.
Oh my
God. Going way back to what we said about Sophie's magic and the way she speaks her intent into objects or things around her, I think that Miyazaki did actually take that idea and insert it and kind of sprinkle it throughout his story.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
Because and it happens, it's very subtle, I think, at the beginning of the movie. And then, like I said, in the last 3 minutes, she just kind of tells everyone what to do and they all do it. And she's magic, But at the beginning of the movie, it's like that's how she finds Turnip Head, and that's how she gets to Howl's castle in the first place. She's got her little bindle with her very delicious looking cheese and bread. How did they make that look so good? And she's trying to cross the field to get to her sister's house because she's an old lady now. It's like, what do I do with my body? And as she's crossing through this field, she just kind of offhandedly says to Turnip Head, because he brings her an umbrella. That's what he does.
He brings her a cane.
A cane. She pulls him out of the bush, so he brings her a cane, and she says offhandedly to Turnip Head, well, why don't you bring me a warm place to sleep? And he brings her Howl's castle. He brings her the castle. And then as she's trying to run to the castle, you hear her say, like, are you gonna let me in or not? And that's when the castle slows down and she gets in. But it's like it's all accidental and it's all offhand. I love that for Sophie in this movie.
She just really locked into that old granny, like the stern voice and the
and she thinks it's because she's a granny, but it's because that's her magic. That's exactly what Sophie does, and that's how Sophie is eventually able to insert Howl's heart back into his chest without killing Calcifer. She just looks at them and says, you know what? She tells Calcifer to live and for Howl's heart to re-enter his body, and then they do.
Yeah.
And then that's that.
And then that's that. If only she had told Solomon to end the war instead of standing up for Howl in that moment.
I know. I also really love, like, can we talk about how she shifts in age? Like,
Oh, yeah.
I really love that, Miyazaki played with this idea of, yes, she's under a curse. Yes, she's, her body has aged to that of an old woman. But, like, she has different phases of old women, right? Like sometimes she's the hunched over crone, and sometimes she's very straight backed and upright, and sometimes she just morphs back into young Sophie. And I just really love how it speaks more to like her as her acceptance of herself,
Yes.
and how strong her own voice is. And like that's like when she knows exactly what she wants to do and how she wants to do it, she's just so resolute and like vivacious,
Yep.
And she's old in those moments,
And
right?
she's old in
But
those
then
moments.
When she's literally unconscious, when she's sleeping, she's young.
Yes.
And when she's in the middle of a beautiful field that Howl gifted her, she's young because she forgets herself.
It's the more she can just lose herself in the moment, the younger she gets. And I love that. I especially love, and it's like, it's so heartbreaking, but I love it when it happens because I'm the give me all your trauma person, where it's just like, Howl is like, but Sophie, you're beautiful. You're beautiful. And then she like shrivels up into that oldest possible posture, and her face ages like 50 years. And she's just like, oh, you're just like, stop it, you two. You're killing me.
Yeah, no, they really come for you.
They come for me in particular. They knew what I was.
It's okay, Joy. This movie came for both of us, clearly.
Listeners, when we were trying to figure out what to do for the 50th episode, it was like, well, it's also going to kind of land near Valentine's Day. What if we both talked about a movie that we loved for different reasons?
For very different reasons. Is 10%, not 10%, what percent of this movie, what percent of my love for this movie comes from my love of Howl's earrings? That I'll never know. But I just... the way they like glint and glimmer whenever he gets really excited. His like super big eyes when he really wants to do something and no one can say no.
Yeah.
I like how his hair flares around his face when he's being super dramatic.
Yes, me too. And then it like floats slowly back down.
Yeah. His hair is a character in this movie, listeners. If you haven't seen it or haven't seen it in a while, I highly recommend. Can't recommend it enough. Just for the hair jokes.
Just for the hair jokes and the goo scene.
And the goo scene. So yeah, he basically throws a tantrum and because Sophie moved around his potions and he was adding things to his hair and he ended up being ginger, which Nella was like, yeah, that was apparently a big deal in the book too. It's just like,
really?
No, I'm ginger.
No, yeah. Like he loses it because he's ginger now. And I'm just like, what is it with British people and being ginger? Like,
Wait, does it happen the same way?
oh yeah, like, well, because she cleans the bathroom. And then, and she keeps saying like, she like touches the bottles and all the things because she's trying to figure out what's the spell that like eats hearts. Like, like has he ground up young girls into his potions? Like that's when she still like doesn't quite understand like it's a metaphor. And yeah, she messes up his hair dye.
And then he collapses in this chair. He's sobbing. What's the point in living if you aren't beautiful?
Yeah.
And then he slowly oozes out this green goo that Nella was like, I'm so glad this is all, like, it's in the book and it's in the movie. Like, this is the same thing that happens. But what I also appreciated, Nella, do you want to talk about the difference in Sophie?
In regards to Sophie, like, she's still very sensible, but like she's got this much more of a temper in the book.
Oh no, sorry. I meant particularly that scene because you were saying in the movie she has her whole like I've never been beautiful a day in my life. And in the book, it's kind of like she's just like, all right, let's get him up the stairs. Like she doesn't get to have that moment of like, you know, why are you complaining? You know,
Right.
where she's
she never really. It never really has that.
Although Sophie with a temper is something I would like to see. I think that would be.
That's interesting.
In the book, their dynamic is a little bit more like how did the difference of the dynamic where Howl is constantly kind of teasing her because, I mean, for example, there's this one quote. The thing is, you're reading the book, and I just kept seeing Howl as like lounging up against the wall, being like, "Now, what have you done, Sophie? Sophie, what are you doing now? What fires have you started?" Like constantly, like this, almost amused but also annoyed by what she's getting up to in his house. And like, there's this one quote, for example, "You have an instinct, Sophie. That's how," said Hal. "Nothing is safe from you. If I were to court a girl who lived on an iceberg in the middle of an ocean, sooner or later, probably sooner, I'd look up to see you swooping overhead on a broomstick. In fact, by now, I'd be disappointed in you if I didn't see you." And then her response is, "Are you off to the iceberg today?" And that's kind of their teasing, flirting, angry flirting. It's like there's so much more like just like snappy emotion between the two of them. They're so sarcastic to each other and just like so snappy. And it's great. It's so screwball comedy in a way.
Actually, do you still have that quote from the author about like what would be a perfect date between Sophie and Hal? Because I think that encapsulated like it would be like at least 3 fights or something.
Oh, no. So there's a wonderful quote from the author, because at the end of the book there was an interview and there were a couple of questions being asked, and one of them was, you know, like, "Oh, well, it seems like young girls in particular all want to marry Howl." And she's like, "Yeah, I've noticed that. I get why he's attractive." And she said, "My opinion of Howl is that much as I love him, he's the last person I'd want to marry. Apart from anything else, I'd want to get to the bathroom sometimes."
I agree with that opinion of Hal. As obsessed as I am with him, absolutely would not marry that man.
No, absolutely. Like, do not pass go, do not collect.
Just don't do it. That fiery heart.
I'd love to share a closet with him. You know, if we could share that jacket.
Share this timeshare jacket.
Yes. So, and there's 2 other books in which Hal and Sophie come up as characters, and they have a child and together and all this stuff. But she got asked, do you have an idea of what a typical day in their happily ever after is like? A typical day in the life of Hal and Sophie? Well, there would be at least 2 quarrels, 1 violent argument, and an explosion of strange magic. They're not a quiet pair.
Yes, that. They're not a quiet pair and is something I really enjoy.
And she also, in describing the movie and talking about the movie, you know, she says how, as for Hal and Sophie, both of them are gentler and more noble than the characters in my book. But I wasn't surprised by this. Movies are always different, you know. But in the book, they're so much more flawed. They snipe at each other, but like Sophie is able to hold her own. Like she's never threatened by Hal. Like she gives back as good as he like snarkily gives. And it is a different dynamic. They're both messes in their own way, and I think that's why they work so well as a romance. Because anyone with any sense would look at them both and be like, "Oh no, I'm not getting in the middle of that. I'll be over here. You figure it out."
And that's exactly right. Like that's all I can really see is that they're 2 very different people, and I just really enjoy. Even in the movie, you can kind of see it, but it obviously, like you said, sounds like the book characters were way more flawed. And I think you can do that on the page a lot easier than you can in a film, because it's very difficult to do, you know, snarky and sarcastic and ribbing, you know, like that friendly ribbing without it coming off as bullying.
Yeah.
You know, it's just not as straightforward. It doesn't translate to screen most of the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Especially
And,
as in the book, Howl is so much more of like he's constantly going out with his guitar to go woo ladies, you know?
See, I knew he had a guitar. I knew it.
Okay,
I knew it.
to be
Never
fair-
fall in love with a man with a guitar.
To be fair, the guitar was the Wizard Solomon's, and he picked it up on a sale along with the skull of the Wizard Solomon. He got them both. He found them both, and he took both. So the guitar is not technically his, but as he is Welsh, she can play it.
All Welsh boys learn how to play the guitar.
Although I think there is a quote where he says, like, and I'm like the one Welsh person who's not that musical. Like, my tragedy is this.
I think this movie just had a very different feel to it, right? The movie was
fair.
much quieter. And I mean, this is kind of a Miyazaki thing to spend time in quiet moments.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's hard I think it's hard to spend time in quiet moments and write a movie about the horrors of war and create two characters who can be sarcastic and snipe at each other.
Yeah. It's like,
there just isn't space for all of it.
I think what the big difference is that the book has more of that big, chaotic Italian family feel that you like you're kind of marrying into, because like, first off, in the book, you have the stepmother. You have Sophie's two sisters, who one of them is actually being courted by Michael, the assistant, because in the book, he's 15. He's not this little kid. He's a teenager. So he's courting her sister, but he's also trying to keep it on the down low because he's pretty sure if Howl knew, Howl would try to court her as well. And he's like, not my Letty. He's like, you can't take her, she's mine. So it's a completely different dynamic between assistant and master, one. And then at the end of the book, everyone's in the house. The sisters are there. Like the sisters, the witch who's apprenticed the sister is there. The stepmother is there. The brother is, like, everyone's there. And everyone is just like, it's total chaos. Everyone's talking over one another. And then it is a beautiful moment of they're all talking and saying and talking over everything. And then, but Sophie and Hal don't hear any of it because they're too wrapped up in each other when she's restored to her youth and like the danger is past. And then they realize how much they love each other. And then the big extended family descends on the house and chaos reigns supreme versus this like little nuclear found family that happens in the movie of just Howl and Sophie.
Three
and
generations
child
and a dog.
Michael and the dog
and the witch
and the witch.
the dog and the witch. They've got a little unit going.
And the fire demon, but still, I mean,
And the fire demon.
now times that by like 3, and that's how many people show up at the end of the book.
But, a similar feel, right? Because as they're floating off in the balcony, they're wrapped up in each other rather than,
Definitely.
everything else around them.
Yeah.
Granted, and I will say, one thing that I thought as I was watching this movie for the first time is I don't really understand why Sophie falls in love with Hal. I don't think I will ever understand that. And from your description, it sounds like the book sells the two of them as a couple slightly better than the movie does. Whereas, because in the movie, there isn't a moment and there isn't really, like, what does she see in him? What does she like about him? I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah.
It just happens, and they sell it with music behind the moments,
Yeah.
Does,
in the
does
book,
anyone know when
there's...
it happens? When does it happen?
It comes across a little bit. It comes across a little bit as the, like, I can fix him just a little bit. Because there's that whole, like, because you have monstrous Howl, as this bird creature that she dreams of going to talk to him. And who knows if that actually happened. My headcanon is it did actually happen, but whatever. It's fine. But, it's the somewhat quiet, aloof figure who, has this deep, dark past. And the woman is like, but if I could just unlock your tragic backstory, I would understand you. It feels a little bit like that, but not to hit you over the head with it.
in the book, I say the difference is Sophie is attracted to Hal. Like, throughout the book, she is, but because she's an old woman and she knows that he's this running around, flirting with all these girls and ghosting them, like, She just always assumes the worst of him, but she can't help but be attracted to him, you know? So it doesn't come from love at first. At first, I think it is just straight up, he's pretty. Oh, this brat, he's so pretty. How dare him? How dare him? You know? And that's why they snipe at each other. And that's why she like gives as good as he does, because like, she is annoyed by him. She's deeply annoyed by him because you get annoyed by the person you have a crush on. And that's what it feels like. But it's not until the end where I think like he really starts, when she starts to understand the depth of the curse that's on him, which is also, the author does a really interesting thing of like, he's from Wales, right? One of the doors leads to his home in Wales. He thought that the Wales was like, the way to trap the demon, because, well, surely this demon will try to attack me in the place they think I'm weakest, but I've got protection in Wales. Like it'll be fine. That's pretty secure, but then she'll be out in the open and then I can get her. But the fire demon gets him because she actually sets up the curse to trigger in Wales. And it's actually it's a John Donne poem, which describes like all these things that happen, like, and then like the untruthful man will like tell the truth, and then the steady woman will, not be steady or something. And Sophie recognizes all of these things and the curses starting to happen and realizing that the curse is coming for Howl, right down to, oh no, he admitted he's a coward, and admits why he runs away from things, because if he runs away from something, then maybe he'll actually get it done. Like he has to run from something to actually accomplish it because he's a coward. And this is a great moment of her being like, oh no, he just told the truth. Oh no. And that's, I think, where it goes from she's just attracted to him and she has a crush on him to she deeply does care about him. She cares about what happens to him. And in that's where the love comes from, especially because then she does the thing, bless her heart, of she still thinks that it's the Welsh teacher who turns out to be the fire demon, right? She thinks it's the Welsh teacher that he's actually fallen in love with proper like. So she goes out of her way to try to save her because she's important to Howl. She goes to confront the Witch of the Waste to save the school teacher. And I love that because she's just like, well, I have to do this because it was my fault. And also, if anything happened to her, I couldn't do that to Howl, right? Because, and I think that's where she has started to, it's not just a crush anymore. Like she cares deeply for Howl. She wants what's best for Howl. Sure. She just doesn't realize yet until like, a couple scenes later that no, you are what's best for Howl, actually, Sophie. It's you.
It was you all along.
You are a balancing force in his life.
Yeah.
I do think we get that in the movie as well. Like, we get sort of this initial, like, he's attractive, but also kind of terrifying because you don't know what he's going to do. He kind of has this reputation. And then, like, slowly she realizes it's like, oh, he's just a brat.
He's just a boy who doesn't want to face any of the things he's responsible for.
Yes.
And sends his mother in his place.
Right. And then, like, but he does, like, let Sophie in these little ways, too. Like, I'm so glad you were there because I was actually terrified, and I was in big trouble and you saved me. There's a lot that I think Sophie does for Howl. And also, Sophie gets a lot out of that relationship also. Like, she has a home and she has people she cares about and she's able to, like, do things with her day that aren't just making hats. Even though I did feel sad that, like, he gave her the hat room and she was just like, oh, it's perfect for an old lady.
Yeah, this isn't quite... I mean, but, that's another thing. Like, because it like, what I'm also forgetting to mention that in the book, when they move the house to protect themselves, and he buys up the shop that was the old hat shop and attaches the door to it so then they can access it, he specifically asks her, what do you want this to be? And she doesn't want it to be a hat shop. She's done with hats. And she's like, well, I want it to be, because they also in the book, they meet the Suleiman, whatever the woman was. That character is actually she sees right through Howl and Sophie. She's much kinder. and she's actually killed by the Witch of the Waste, and he mourns her very deeply. She's not this like conniving, like Xanatos Gambit, Glinda in the background, actually causing the war. And what she remembers is how beautiful her house was and how it was filled with flowers. And she tells Hal, well, what I want this to be is a flower shop, actually. I don't want a hat shop. I would like a flower shop. I want it to be full of flowers. And he actually makes her, like, he had made this field in the past, but he connects it to the house specifically because Sophie asked him. And it's this beautiful place that her and Michael go out in the mornings when there's still dew, and they collect all the flowers for the flower shop. And like, I think that's also where it goes from, he's just a brat and I just have this crush on him, but he listens to what I'm saying. He does give me what I ask for. And I've never really had that before.
In the movie, I think I read that moment very differently, because I think that, and maybe I'm incorrect, who knows, but I think that when she realizes that he's connected the house back to her town so that she can be somewhere that she's comfortable, and because when she first looks out of the windows, it felt to me like she was happy to be there and happy to be back. And then when she stepped into her room, it was almost like she was touched, but her whole body tightened up because she's Sophie. And when things are too perfect, it means the person is going to run away, right? So she tightened up and she was like, yeah, this is perfect for a cleaning lady. But I kind of felt like she was saying that because she didn't want to give herself away, right? And she was able to control herself in that moment. And then he took her to the field of flowers and she lost herself in the moment completely.
Yeah. And again, like, the difference with the book is that we hear Sophie's inner thoughts. So when Sophie says, like, I actually do want this to be a flower shop, and I want it to be filled with beautiful things, and all these terrible things I know this danger is coming for Hal, and I don't know how much more time we have, and like, that's her worry and that's her fear, and it gets taken from her. Like, we do get that narration from Sophie. We do know what she's feeling and what she's thinking and why she likes seeing these things that he does for her.
No, I think that's fair. That will always be true, book versus movie.
Yeah.
We are running over time, but do people have one more things they want to share?
My one more thing is Heen, because we have not mentioned him yet.
Aw, Heen is also my one more thing, because he's precious.
Cute.
My good trader boy.
He's so fluffy, and his feet are so small, and I don't understand why they're so small. And the way he barks sounds like a sneeze. It's just so cute. And I love that when you first meet him, it's when Howl told Sophie he would be nearby, but didn't tell her how he would do it because he's a brat.
Yes.
And Sophie spends a good chunk of this movie thinking that Heen is Howl.
Yep. Including needing to carry him up the stairs, which, by the way, if you're going to have a fetch dog that has legs long enough to go up your front steps. I'm just saying.
But that's part of what, like, helped her fall in love with Heen.
Also
Maybe
true.
It was all a ruse.
It's too late to toss you.
That can be a shared one more thing, Joy. We're over time anyway.
We are over time.
I think my one more thing is just, like, I understand why Miyazaki made Markle a little boy. I kind of do miss the teenage Michael, and also the fact that, it's just the way he's described. It's very kind of throwaway, blink if you miss it, but Markle is black. Because of the way he's described, it would be very easy to cast him as a black kid. And maybe one day we will get that, but just wanted to point it out there.
There's a part of me that's like, I would almost rather the movie not do it if they think they would get it wrong. You know what I mean? And I don't necessarily know that I trust 2004 anime to, show representation super well. But that's not to say it didn't exist, and that's not to say it wasn't possible. I am kind of sad that he wasn't at least a teenager, and it would have been nice to see a little more, diversity. Because isn't Sophie also supposed to be like Ginger or something, too, you were saying?
Oh gosh, yeah, no, she is a bit of a ginger herself. Like she's not like this.
Yeah,
mousy
like she
brunette.
has red
She's
hair.
Yeah. So
Which I thought was like, you could have done that.
Maybe, but I think that Ginger fits with her character in the book. But
Fair.
mousy brown hair fits with the character in the movie.
And
like,
again,
also they gave her that
and again,
hair.
it sort of comes into like ginger has such a connotation in British culture of being undesirable. Like
Yeah.
that it makes sense that for the book it makes sense she's ginger, for the movie it makes sense she's like a mousy little brown mouse, you know, in a gray dress. Because
in an anime, the orange-haired character is fiery.
Yeah.
Yes. Also true.
Loud.
This is also true. I do wish we could have had the Michael that was in the book. But, you know, there's a part of me, too, that's just like, I don't know that the Miyazaki movie would have done it justice. And I almost rather not have seen it if it was going to be done not poorly, but not with like good enough regard for the thing they were doing.
Right, exactly. Like if it had been done incorrectly, it would have been off-putting.
Yes.
And it would have distracted from the rest of the film.
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which is super unfortunate. I do hope we get to see Michael as he is in the book one day.
That's it.
But yes, maybe when they ultimately remake this entire movie for a Western audience.
Maybe. You know it's going to happen. Or live action Howl's
someday. Exactly. Exactly. It's going to happen. We'll see it there.
I mean, I
don't think this...
I don't know if I would necessarily want to see this adapted again. I mean, I know there's 2 other books, but they are sort of more loosely bound together. I mean, like the second book, for example, is really more of an Arabian Nights take. So it takes place in another country, and there's like genies and djinn, and it's like I don't really remember that one as well, but you know that can get a little fraught. I'd have to give it another reread to see how well it's aged. I'm sort of more curious if like there's more potential for adapting her Christomancy series that deals with like alternate universe travel and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, I think if you're going to try to adapt something else from Diana, I would eye that one.
Well, we'll see. We'll see what decision the studio execs make, because, you know,
fingers crossed.
Sometimes they want to reinvent the wheel, and sometimes they're like, hey, remember that thing you knew and loved for a really long time? Let's do it again live action. It'll be better, we promise.
Right. Definitely.
Every time. And then they do a prequel series. Who wanted a prequel series with Gaston? Not me.
Wasn't what I asked
for. Still mad about it. Who let Josh Gad out of this? Who let him? Who gave this man the right?
Oh, leave Josh alone.
Look, I love a good fanfic. Please not a prequel LeFou Gaston with like their friends. What are we doing? What are we doing, Josh Gad?
On that note, listeners, we would love to hear from you. Please check us out at Binge O'Clock Pod on Twitter and Facebook, where you can answer the question, if you could have a magical door that opens up to any location, what would that location be? You can also email us at bingeoclockpod@gmail.com. And don't forget, we have a Patreon. Find us at patreon.com/clockpod.
That's right. And tell your friends, tell your family, tell your loved ones, tell the live lobsters in your life about Binge O'Clock, and we will see you next time.
It would 100% be to whatever spit of land. Like I could have like the garden and farm of my dreams, and then I could still live in Queens and garden in the morning and come back in time just by boop, and I'm back home ready to like sign in for the day at work. But then boop, I'm back out there checking on my chickens. Not in Flushing.
I love that. That's so
That's
you.
what I would want my door to be.
Checking on my chickens.
Mine is like a gorgeous tropical beach somewhere with warm water and white sand.
That's fair.
And yeah.
All right, but I would like also then access to your magical door so then I could like maybe plant some tropical things on your tropical island and then have access to the tropical things that I can't grow on my not tropical farm, but then I can bring you like, cheese.
So, Nella, we've invented Animal Crossing.
It's literally Animal Crossing. Congratulations.
What we've done is we've invented Animal Crossing.
That's the game. That's the game. You did it. You did the live action version of Animal Crossing. Except instead of a plane.
All right, but if that raccoon shows up, like I am kicking capitalism to the curb. Capitalism. Take those bells and shove it.
No radishes, as far as the eye can see. Turnips? Radishes? It doesn't matter.
Radishes.
And on that note...